The next quadrant is the risk management quadrant. Let's look at that lower right-hand side for a second. This is where we're going to group all the activities that are about companies' attempts to manage risk, lower costs, and overall try to assert some control over both to reduce negative impacts. There are two important drivers of all the activities here. One is globalization, a pretty familiar concept, I'm sure. As free trade between countries expanded, companies began to conduct business on a more global scale. The model of contracting for your manufacturing with a factory in a low-wage country was created, and a global supply chain ensued. And that introduced a very new and very complex dynamic for business impacts on society and the environment. I think we've come to know this issue pretty well. The footwear industry, the apparel industry, the toy industry are just some of the examples. Arguably, footwear and apparel were the most visible. And use of the internet and social media tools have only made this risk even more severe. The other driver is sustainable resource use, climate change. We now understand there's an urgent need for companies to reduce their carbon footprint, to shift to more renewable energy use, and to use water more efficiently. And there's a great deal of corporate social responsibility activity in this quadrant as a result of those. Globalization is a complex issue, and companies continue to wrestle with it today. But there's been substantive progress in important areas. One area of real progress is collaboration, multi-stakeholder groups working together to solve problems. For example, in the absence of international country-level standards, companies, NGOs, and governments collaborated to develop a set of common standards to address key supply chain issues. It happened in the apparel industry. The Fair Labor Association, or FLA, is a group of companies, colleges, and universities, civil society organizations working together with factory management to address labor practices and working conditions in source factories. Another example for the same structure is the Responsible Business Alliance for the Electronics Industry. The Sustainable Apparel Coalition is another example of effective collaboration. This coalition of companies was born from a meeting of Patagonia and Walmart. Hard to find two more different kinds of companies, but they represent what this kind of coalition can actually accomplish. The Sustainable Apparel Coalition developed the Higg Index, which provides the industry with one standardized tool to measure the environmental, social, and labor impacts of making and selling their products. It's a significant advance. Another example of progress in this quadrant is increasing transparency and communications around the issues, the actions, and the progress companies are making. It's often called non-financial reporting. And here, the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, is another multi-stakeholder collaboration. And it's emerged as the leading set of reporting standards for companies across industries. We looked at lessons that came out of the charity quadrant. Let's also look at some lessons that come out of this quadrant and learn how the field has evolved in its attempts to manage risk and assert some kind of control over an uncertain world. The actions in this quadrant have moved CSR, corporate social responsibility, closer to the business. So it helps with the problem we mentioned earlier, that limit of being separate from the business. But while supply chain issues are embedded in the business, the focus is on one part of the business, operations, improving the process of doing what we do. Some would call this the back end of the business, different from the front end, which is where you would define what market you're going to pursue, what products you'd offer, how you're basically going to compete. So at this point in the evolution, CSR hasn't really tapped into the central driver and reason for business existence. Another lesson, these are complex issues, hard questions and no easy answers. There are competing priorities, strong voices. Yeah, there's great promise in collaboration to inform people collaborating to define common standards to improve social and environmental impacts. That's happening. But from a consumer standpoint, that promise is not quite fulfilled. For example, the lumber and paper industries have their share of hard questions about how to sustainably manage forests. How many acres of clear-cut forest is acceptable? What's an acceptable method of pesticide use? This is a seal from the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC. They're a multi-stakeholder group that establishes a set of standards for sustainable forestry. For consumers, if you're interested in supporting these practices, it's easy. You just look for that green pine tree. Easy to remember. I can trust that. But there's another green pine tree out there from another group, came out with their own set of standards. For consumers, which tree should they trust? Does that mean it's up to them to find out what's a really good answer to the question of how many acres of clear-cut forest is okay or what the pesticide use should be? That's not going to result in any large-scale consumer behavior change. So, good substantive progress from the risk management quadrant for sure, but still some good distance to travel.